welcome to Flexpo for Business. We're going to be talking today about the future of HR. My name is Brian Ballantyne. I'm a regional manager at Amazon and on the Flexpo advisory board. And I'm super happy to be joined today by Ursula Taverner, also from Flexpo. Joe Gallacher, who's the editor of HR Magazine, which is a monthly magazine I recommend that you all sign up for if you don't already. It has webinars, awards, and also the most influential in HR series. Kathryn Kendall, who's the Chief People Officer at Benefex, which is an online benefits platform and also looks at the wider employee experience. And Nicola, Pease, who's the founder of Ignite Coaching and Consulting, which is about making flexibility the norm for small and medium-sized businesses. So welcome all of you. I'm really happy that you're here today for the future of HR.
Thanks for having us.
Fantastic. So the theme of today is looking at HR partnerships and how HR can work with leaders to embed long-lasting cultural transformation. So, Joe, can I ask you the first question? In 2020, HR has been a key enabler for business continuity. How is this changing the wider perception of HR from your perspective?
Yeah, quite a lot, to be honest. We've always seen as HR Magazine, we're advocates of HR professionals having a seat at the table and being really closely connected to the C-suite. But 2020 has just completely changed it. You know, fortunately, a lot of businesses already appreciated just the wide-reaching role that HR does. But now it's seen as a strategic force to be reckoned with. You know, it's not just someone who sorts out your annual leave or something like that. It's someone who can make influential company-wide decisions, and HR in 2020 has basically been whether a company is successful or not. You know, have you moved quick enough to turn all of your office workers into remote working? You know, how are you going to get people back into the office safely? They've been absolutely vital for the C-suite, and I think moving forward that there will be a lot more respect and appreciation as to the difficult and challenging but also incredibly useful job that they do.
Yeah, I just building on that, I've seen the same. I've seen in organisations where HR wasn't at the table that they've gone back to the table. So we've been able to kind of take that place back at the table and been part of that kind of equal decision making about the right thing for the business going forward, rather than kind of seen as, I guess, as that support function that yes is there and does a vital job, but actually isn't part of that executive decision making process. I think I've also seen a change in I guess resurgence, I guess, of organisational development and skills, particularly in the OD space in this during COVID. So I've noticed a shift to thinking about culture change, thinking about how we transform the organisation, thinking about organisations, particularly after the initial kind of crisis management mode, I would say, and the initial kind of operational tactical needs of, as you said, you know, dealing with the ever-changing, you know, rules and regulations from the government and what was happening, what wasn't happening, furloughing staff, bringing staff in, etc. I think now that that initial crisis period is over, what I'm noticing is much more future-focused HR, much more part of that strategic decision-making on how are we going to make our organisation, you know, successful for the future after all of this, or whilst we're living with all of this.
I completely agree, and I think that actually, I mean, I don't think any of us would have wished 2020 to have played out in quite the way that it has, but I genuinely think it's been probably one of the biggest opportunities HR have had, certainly in my career as an HR professional, because HR has been thrust, sort of as you were saying, Joe, front and centre into an organisation, and actually, you're completely right. Okay, we've done the crisis management stuff. That was the initial stuff, but we've found ourselves in this position all of a sudden where we're sitting at the hub of an organisation, and I think the opportunity now for HR professionals is to make sure that we don't lose that momentum. We now need to build on where we are, because, like, you know, for so long we've heard, you know, the industry in general talking about how much we want to be at the table and we want to have a voice and we want to have a seat around the table. Well, we're there, we've got it, we're here, we're front and centre. Yes, perhaps in less than ideal circumstances. I think now what I'm really interested to see is how does this play out for the profession beyond 2020, beyond COVID, because I think we've been given that opportunity, and I therefore think it sits with every single one of us to make sure that we don't lose that and that we don't lose that ground.
Definitely. And I think I think it's really important. Now we've got the ears of the people that make, you know, the really big decisions. Now we're respected, now we're appreciated a lot more. And people need to be saying, oh, actually, have you thought about this way of working? You know, have you thought about our diversity strategy? Have you thought about the way that we recruit? You know, because we have that seat at the table, if we're going to call it that, let's expand on that as much as possible and use those new relationships that we built with both the senior team and just other people in the business who you might have been catching up with a lot more. You know, while you're remote working, you might have built different relationships. Let's utilize those moving forward to say, let's not just go back to what it was before 2020 happened. Let's build from the ground up towards from here, and let's move forward strategically as well as just the more day-to-day running of things.
That's such a great point about getting a key seat at the table, and I think that strategic view is something we're definitely going to talk about today. What I wanted to do first was, you know, think beyond the table into the room and the workspace. And HR has you know, traditionally played a key role in keeping people safe at work, you know, along with facilities and health and safety. And I wonder, like, how has remote working and the COVID kind of safety concerns shaped HR's roles from that perspective? Maybe Kathryn, do you want to give us your views on this to start off with?
Yeah, definitely. It's been really interesting. I've reflected on this a lot, I think, since the start of the year, because I think it's fair to say that probably prior to 2020, you had a small minority of very high risk industries where health and safety was quite rightly taken extremely seriously and sat front and centre at that organisation's strategic approach. But I think it's also fair to say that in a lot of other low risk organisations, it was really seen as a little bit of a tick box exercise. You know, the pain of all the annual risk assessments and all, you know, we must do this and we must be compliant with health and safety. There were probably a few eye rolls from your employees are going through it. And I just think that 2020 has suddenly brought health and safety to life, because suddenly this isn't just some abstract case where, you know, somebody could get very ill, somebody could be hospitalized, somebody could die. All of a sudden, we're seeing the news headlines, we're seeing what's happened in the media. We are seeing people's loved ones, people's colleagues be hospitalized, have long-term effects, and even in the worst cases die. And so I think health and safety has come front and center quite rightly. I think what's been very interesting as well, and certainly for me, is it's probably redefined actually what health and safety is, because I was probably guilty of thinking, okay, well, it's risk assessments, it's BDU, it's going through fire safety with employees. But actually, when we really think about health and safety, it's about keeping our employees well, enabling them to perform at their best. And it's also, and particularly I think with COVID and particularly with lockdown, it's really, certainly for our organisation, been very focused on how do we look after our people's mental health. Actually keeping people physically safe, for those of us who can work remotely, has been quite straightforward. We moved 100% of our workforce to remote working within one 24-hour period. They were able to comply fully with lockdown. The risk to them for their physical health became pretty low. But their mental health, on the other hand, has really, really oscillated in that time. And so for me, I've seen health and safety change in my mind completely from being something that sat on the peripheral, that, okay, we've got to tick the boxes and go through it, but we're low risk and it doesn't matter, to, oh my goodness, I have a responsibility to keep my employee population safe, working at their best, and also ensuring that from a mental health perspective, in very, very challenging times, possibly the most challenging some of our people will have seen, that actually we have support in place for them, that they know where to go, and that we provide them with that real holistic approach to health and safety.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think it's changed, I think, as well as kind of changing the perception of health and safety, and I would agree with you, that's completely what's happened. I think it's also increased the collaboration, I think, between health and safety and other parts of the business. So I was talking to one of my clients, and she said that they suddenly have really effective cross-functional working groups in place as part of their recovery plan. So they're looking at, you know, which are the key services that they need to bring back into the office, how are they going to do that safely, speaking to, you know, their health and safety colleagues and their property colleagues, their facilities management colleagues, and working together to kind of come up with that solution and come up with those plans. Whereas, as you say, previously they were very distinct functions, which we all sort of, you know, had our own things and our own kind of views on, oh, well, that's your responsibility, that's my responsibility, or it's just a tick box exercise. Whereas I think I'm seeing much more collaboration now around how we work effectively together to all kind of make the best of going forward.
And I think moving forward, if we're looking at returning people back to the workforce, and I know a lot of people are already heading back into the office. For example, it's my first day back into the office today. And one of the most important things that we're seeing throughout our news coverage and throughout the reports and research that we receive is the key driver in people going back into the workforce is whether they feel safe, whether they feel secure in the office, whether they think the appropriate conditions have been met, you know, whether they think social distancing can happen in their workplace, not just in the actual setting but on the way there as well. You know, there's lots of issues around getting public transport, etc. So I think HR has to really reassure those people that maybe that hadn't considered. If you would have asked me 6 months ago whether you really thought about your health and safety within the office, you just think, well, yeah, as long as it's not falling down, I'm sure I'll be all right. Whereas now it's absolute priority.
Yeah,
that's so true. And sometimes I think of it like a reset on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like, you know, there we were bobbing along with our self-esteem and actualization needs, and we've totally been reset down to kind of basic safety. Have we got food for our kids? Can we feel a belonging when we're so remote? So yeah, all the things that you all mentioned, I think are so critical. So we've all been forced into flexible working, or many of us have, but, you know, thinking about, you know, maybe a positive psychology point of view, looking at the uplift, what evidence is there that flexible working transforms organizational effectiveness, and how has this changed during COVID-19? Maybe Nicola, do you want to take the lead on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's tons of evidence, I think would be the first thing. I feel like we're preaching to the converted here slightly, but we recognise, you know, as HR professionals, we've recognised for, I guess, many years that flexibility brings a level of productivity, and there's been lots of research and studies around that, that kind of giving people the choice, giving people some control over their working pattern, allowing people to have greater work-life balance or greater work-life integration, promotes things like well-being. It reduces stress. It increases engagement of employees because they feel they're less likely to take time off. They're more likely to give more because they feel that they're getting something back from the organization. And I think the studies have proven over and over that does have an increase in productivity overall. And I think what COVID has done, I guess, is accelerated that even more. So I think it has accelerated the evidence that is out there, and our ability to collect that evidence and find the metrics around it that we can show to the world, that we can show to those doubters and those believers that actually flexible working can work, and it does have a huge impact then on how effective and productive the organisation can be.
I totally agree with Nicola. You know, there's some managers that were quite hesitant to perhaps try remote working. I don't really trust it. How do I know that my workforce is doing what they say they're doing? Now they've had no choice but to see it for themselves. And for, I'm sure most of the things that we've seen coming through the magazine is that it's been wildly popular, and a lot of people say the workplace will never be the same again. I will never do 9 till 5 in the office every single day. And you're seeing that quite a lot. But I think it's quite important for HR to remember that what you're gaining from maybe not doing a commute, spending more time with your family, etc., you could also be losing that connection with your colleagues. You know, obviously the fact we can do this webinar like this is amazing. Technology is incredible, but there is something about coming in, working together, having a conversation face to face, that collaboration, that bond, that banter that you do miss, and you naturally will go without when you're not in the physical workplace. So I think moving forward, HR does need to think, okay, how can we get the best of both worlds here?
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think it creates a different way of working, doesn't it? It creates a different way of how you communicate with your employees. It creates a different way of how you lead your employees, how you kind of have that social interaction. And I think as we move forward as a HR profession, I think one of the key challenges we will have is how do we manage when we have hybrid workforces, and how do we kind of get the best out of our people when you have some people in the office, some people not in the office, when you're giving people that flexibility to work how they choose. How do you then how do you create that community at the same time, so that you're still creating that community of people to work with?
I agree, and I read a really interesting article the other day, because I think your point on the hybrid future of work, Nicola, is so true. And I think a lot of people see that as kind of like, okay, well, post-COVID, that's going to be the holy grail for most people. That gives us the best of both worlds. I read a really interesting article, I think it was in the Harvard Business Review, which says actually there's a real risk it ends up giving us the worst of all worlds, because actually you suddenly find you have two disparate populations. You try and please everybody, you end up pleasing nobody. And you're right, some of the organizational efficiencies and improvements that we've made over this period of time. So, you know, we as a business were so open to flexible working. It was almost kind of, it was a no-brainer for us to move to 100% remote. But we then sense checked ourselves and said, well, hang on a minute, we can't just assume it's working okay. So we put in a set of KPIs, we had quantifiable measures that we looked at, and, you know, things like our customer NPS score went through the roof. And it went through the roof despite the fact we couldn't be with our customers, and despite the fact that actually for a lot of people, they were at home in very challenging circumstances. I'm sure a lot of people watching this, you know, ourselves included, have had the joys of balancing working full time with attempting to become a teacher. I know now for certain there is a very good reason that I never went into the teaching profession, and it's because I would be truly terrible at it. But it's almost like actually we've been able to make those organizational efficiencies and gains despite very challenging home environments. I think there's kind of this assumption that, oh, when we can get to a hybrid world, everything's going to be amazing. I think that's almost as challenging again, if not more so, than the setup we're in now. And I think we need to be careful not to sleepwalk into that scenario and suddenly find we're backpedaling on all of those gains that have been made.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. I think I read the same article actually, because it was talking as well, wasn't it, about creating two different working cultures. So you're, you know, you're creating the culture and the normal way of working and the norms for people who are, you know, never in the office versus the culture of the people who are in the office. And how do you deal with that as an organization when you're, you know, like you say, you're walking into having then two different cultures, having two different ways of working, and yeah, it can just cause more problems. So it's really, I think this is the biggest challenge we're going to face as a HR team going forward.
And if we're going on the split in terms of two working cultures, we could also arguably look at the divide if your company has put some people on furlough. You know, if these people that might not be coming back till the end of October haven't worked since the start of March, things have changed. I feel like I've aged about 20 years in the past 6 months, you know. So for people who haven't been working all of that time, their job could look entirely different, and the people that they work with could have developed stronger bonds with other people, you know, automatically without meaning to. The people that have remained working, there might be a little divide between the furloughs and the not, and that might have a few in-jokes and, well, almost a bit of resentment, you know, thinking I've kind of held this company together, you know, or this role together. Well, you've been obviously through no fault of your own and no choice, you've not been working, and how to kind of fuse that culture and bring it back together again, and all these different expectations and attitudes around remote working. You know, the ones who have worked throughout might be all for it, whereas furloughed workers don't really fancy it that much because they've not experienced it. I really think over the next year or so that HR will have its work cut out trying to bring back this workforce and fuse them back together again.
Absolutely, and those are brilliant points that you've all raised, and I'm already seeing that. I mean, I've come into the office. I've started working at home in the morning, making lunch for my kids, and then coming into work in the afternoon. But then colleagues in different countries are saying, "Oh no, I've got office envy. Like, we're not in our city. We're not allowed to do that." So there's already this divide, and it sounds like there's a lot of questions. You know, as Kathryn, you're saying, let's not sleepwalk into this situation. Particularly things like talent reviews. There's a lot of anxiety over talent reviews, particularly from people who've been, homeschooling as well and haven't been able to, compared to other peers. So, and so I think there are a lot of good questions we need to answer. But the fundamental question around flexibility might be a blocker for some. And we talked at the start about being at the table, being at that, even that boardroom table. What happens in companies if some of the strong voices at the board are just opposed to flexible working altogether and want to kind of revert back to how things were in the past and don't seem to recognize kind of where we are now? How can HR partner with leaders to kind of shift hearts and minds, just to even consider flexibility at all?
So I've got some experience of this. So in my one of the projects I worked on was a project with Jaguar Land Rover to move to a more flexible way of working. And the key driver for it from a business perspective, so from the board perspective, was, we were in different times then, was that actually we'd run out of capacity. So we would physically run out of office capacity for the recruitment plans that we had and the existing organisation that we had. So what the driver was to not invest huge amounts of money in new office facilities and new capacity, and instead to change the way that we worked. So to recreate the office spaces to be more kind of open desk, hot desking areas, kind of collaboration hubs, meeting areas, individual workspaces. But with it, of course, as we all know from a HR perspective, came the huge culture change that went with that. So the change in leadership, the change in mindset that went with it. And there was huge resistance because the driver from board level was, we just need to save some money and we need to find a way to make this work. Their driver wasn't about the benefits of flexibility. So what as a HR team, what we had to do and the kind of approach we took was that we had to take a very kind of softer coaching approach with those leaders, and I guess that would be my advice when you know, unfortunately there still are the skeptics out there. I was talking to one of my friends the other day who, despite the fact that their business has managed to work remotely for the last 4.5 months, the MD is desperate to get everybody back into the office, so she's now working on how they can do that. But there are still skeptics out there, and it's trying to help them to overcome their concerns and their resistance to it, I guess, would be where I found it to be most effective. So taking that coaching approach with them, giving them the space. So what I found worked effectively with the resistant leaders that I had within JLR was to have coaching one-to-ones with them, to sit down and kind of let them air their views, let them explore that, let them understand what was holding themselves back before we then pushed forward with what needed to happen for their part of the business. And I think giving leaders that space to recognise the change that they're going through allowed us to then move forward with the project being a success and people moving to that, rather than enforcing a change on them that then was always going to revert back to the way that they had done it previously.
I think Kathryn, you wanted to jump in on there.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, Nicola. I think you're spot on, and I think my issues sometimes with how we as a profession have pitched flexible working have been, we've done, for all the right reasons, we've pitched it as it's the right thing to do, and we know it's the right thing to do, right? Because we see the data, we speak to people every day, we recognise the challenges because we inhabit the worlds that our people spend time in. We know the difference it makes. It widens the talent pool, it broadens from a diversity perspective. There's almost nothing that it can't deliver. But I think we've definitely been guilty as a profession of just going, well, we should do flexible working because it's the right thing. And I think what needs to happen is we have to put ourselves in the shoes of those leaders and actually, well why is the cynicism there? Understanding what their drivers are and what they are trying to achieve, and then getting the data, because we sit on this absolute data mine, right? And never more than now, when we've come out this enforced flexible working experiment that we've all been through, we have this huge amount of data there. And I think it's about, going back to, looking at people on an individual situation, what's their concerns, what are they trying to achieve? Chances are they're trying to achieve better delivery outcomes for the area of the business that they have responsibility for. So it's then showing them, using that data, so it doesn't become this emotive piece, so it becomes actually quantifiable, built on this flexible working experiment. We can actually then show them how we deliver that for them better, be that getting in better talent, be that talent retention, be that actually output, because we have the KPIs that show metrics in terms of how output's improved during this period. Again, back to my conversation earlier, we mustn't lose this opportunity, and I just think it's now about taking that data set that we have, understanding what their concerns are, and using the two together to define the future of the workforce going forward.
You're so right, Kathryn, and like you say, never more than now has there been so much data out there proving just how successful flexible working can be. I don't think a day goes by where we don't get 3, maybe 4 press releases saying X amount of people really want flexible working and stuff like that. But I think if you're going to bring everyone along with you for the journey, you're going to have to understand people's concerns. Management, it's not necessarily a controlling thing that they think, well, if they're not in their office, they're not working. Maybe it is that, but maybe it's something else. More junior members of staff, it's very easy to say, yeah, I'd love to work at home if you've got a nice study where you can be quiet and you're cut off from things. Less so if you're a potentially more junior member of staff, that you're living in a house share, you know, you're literally living at work because your desk, if you have a desk, is to the side of you, outside of your bed, you know, you're living with 3-4 other people. It's not always achievable to have this perfect, calm, serene, flexible work environment. So I think it's acknowledging that these different areas, and flexible working doesn't work for everyone, and understanding that I understand your concerns with it, and yeah, fair enough. Or if you've got someone junior and you want them to train up, they can learn a lot from other colleagues and stuff like that. And it's kind of taking looking at all these concerns bit by bit and thinking, okay, how do we overcome this, rather than just saying, oh, don't be daft, all the data says that people love working from home. You know, it's about looking at the holistic, taking a holistic approach to it.
Yeah, absolutely, Jo. That's what I found. I guess that would be one of the biggest lessons learned in that huge change project that we went through, was not underestimating the amount of time it took to go through the kind of concerns and objections step by step. And it was, you know, it started at leadership level, and then we kind of went down to kind of the various levels of management, and then all of the staff. Because it is, you know, it is a huge change for people, and like you say, it's not for everyone. So some people like it, some people don't like it, and you really need to invest the time to then understand and unpick what those concerns are, to take everyone with you forward.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And the surveys I'm seeing, where obviously people are sharing concerns, but there's also in some groups psychological safety, and people are unwilling to share that it's not working because they're so scared about maybe losing their job. So it's kind of picking through it all and like finding the real kind of signal within all the survey data. And you're right, at that board level and at that table, data is so important to kind of make the case and to kind of, you know, work through some of the challenges. As you take it down to kind of more operational levels, you know, managers who are running teams, you know, different leaders, how can HR support them with the kind of right, you know, skills and behaviors so they can, you know, towards a kind of culture change towards flexibility in the long term?
Yeah, so
go ahead. Yeah,
happy to take this one, Brian. I think we have to face up to a reality, and it's a really hard reality to face up to, but for too long in the majority of organizations, people management across the board has been really quite poor. And I say this based on a pretty wide series of examples and data that I've looked at. And this isn't true in all cases, right? And I'm conscious of not wanting to generalize, but certainly in a large number of organizations, people have learned to people manage via presenteeism. So they have learned to manage their people by having them literally within touching distance around them. We have valued performance based on how long somebody is at their desk, how much can we see them doing, how much do they interact with others around them, what do we think of them personally, do we like them? There's a load of evidence that suggests we're more likely to think somebody's performing well if we just get on with them pretty well socially. So we've been able to take this kind of pretty lazy approach to people management. You know, some organizations are very good at putting together people management training, some are not so good, but it's all based on this idea that in the majority of cases your team are there and you manage them by being there. All of a sudden, we are thrust into a world where that's gone. And for what it's worth, I think it's wonderful that is gone, because actually it's going to force a real focused look at actually, what should I be doing as a people manager? What are the results that I'm trying to achieve? What am I trying to deliver for that person or for that team that I look after? We have to start to look not at how long they're at their desk, but what are they delivering? What's actually the outcome? What's coming out of that? How well do they interact with people across the organizations, not just their mates who they might go up to and spend time with at break times and lunch times, but how effective are they as a communication hub at sort of spreading that communication right widely across the business? How have they developed? What's that actual skill set there, as opposed to what do I see them doing? I think this is going to take a huge amount of work from HR teams, from organisations. This is wholesale change. In many ways, I think it's even harder than the other challenges we've talked about so far, because it's so alien to most of us. It's completely different to what the skill of people management has been historically. So I think there's almost potentially a whole new area of the profession that's going to open up, I think, in terms of real specialist people managers, because I personally have a view that I don't think you can teach people management. I think you can help someone to be a better people manager. I don't personally believe that you can fundamentally teach somebody to people manage if they don't have that skill set. But I think there's a real opportunity for people within organizations, and again, HR sits front and center here, to redefine what good people management looks like. And again, much as we talked about with flexible working, this time it's all about outputs, and it's ultimately all about giving that person a great experience, in order for them to deliver the best possible results, both for themselves, but also for the business.
I think that's a really interesting point that you raised, actually, around, you know, the way we have historically considered people to be good people managers or not good people managers is entirely based on, like you say, having those people in front of you and seeing them there, and moving away from that into a world where, you know, we are measuring outputs in a different way, we're communicating in a different way, we're leading in a different way. It requires and will require, as you say, a huge change in the way that we as HR are helping managers to become better people managers.
Yeah, and I think communication is key to obviously so many different parts of the business, but never more so now, where we're not sort of bumping into people and saying, oh, how are things going? You know, there has to be that level of communication across the business and across managers to different employees, that they won't get really panicky if, oh, my manager's giving me a call, that must mean I'm you know, I've done something wrong or whatever. It has to be, oh, my manager's just giving me a call, we're going to have a chat and we're going to catch up on how things are going and stuff like that. It has to be not necessarily more informal, but more connected, I guess, to make sure that there isn't that kind of anxiety around speaking to your manager or whatever, and that way, and HR can support that, I think, by encouraging people managers across the business, regardless of whether you're HR friendly or not, just to keep chatting with their employees, asking them how things are going at home, how they're feeling, you know, and maybe we often hear, how are you, but how are you really, you know, that kind of extended question, just to kind of double down, not just, yeah, I'm fine, everything's all right, okay, brilliant, let's tick that off and move on to something else. No, it's about people, you know, and you don't have to be in HR to care about people. And I think that's the thing that I really want to get across.
Those are such great points, and it does feel like we're moving from an old-fashioned idea of control and cost to more, you know, about, you know, value and empowerment, and companies that haven't bothered to measure their outputs are having to do that now, as you were saying, Kathryn, and, you know, not just, you know, time in the office, but actually what are you delivering, what value are you adding? So, you know, just to wrap up, I mean, 2020, you know, has been a very interesting year. The irony of 2020 vision is that we had no idea what was going to hit us this year, but maybe based on some of the lessons learned, you've probably got some predictions for 2021 and ongoing. So maybe, you know, each of you could just give me one of your predictions, I know, for the coming 12 months, and maybe we can catch up in a year and see how they were. But, you know, Jo, you're on the screen. Do you want to start? What's your prediction for the future?
My prediction moving forward is that trust within an organisation is going to be absolutely fundamental as we're moving to more remote working, as people are changing the way they work, changing the relationships we have with colleagues, with customers, etc. In order to take these people on this journey, you have to trust in your colleagues, you have to trust in your senior management, you have to meet it with you have to meet this change with open arms and not skepticism, and the most important part of that for me is trust.
Nicola.
I was just trying to unmute myself. The joys of Zoom. My predictions for 2021, less Zoom, hopefully. No, I think building on your point, I think on trust, I think with that, I think I can see a big shift in the way that we measure and kind of manage our people. So I can see a big shift in kind of measuring accountability and how that improves. I guess how that enhances the level of trust we have in people, and how we change the way that we are measuring people's performance and the outputs that they're doing, rather than what they're inputting in, or the presentism of physically seeing them in the office. And I think that that's a huge shift for most organisations from where they have been to where they will be. And I think that's a big shift that we'll see next year.
I think from my perspective, I think we're going to see a lot of existential angst over what is the future of work now. Are we remote? Are we in the office? Are we hybrid? I'm sure we'll do what HR does really well, which is, you know, kind of navel gaze at ourselves a lot while we work out what that should be. But joking aside, I think to to touch on the points we made earlier about this hybrid future, that does seem to be where the majority of organisations are going, contrary to some of the hyperbole we've seen in the media. I don't think the office is dead. I think absolutely there's a need. I think it's been interesting to see the curve we've gone on through this. I think when everybody first moved to remote, everybody was like, oh my God, this is amazing. We could do this forever. Who needs an office? I think as we've continued on that journey and the honeymoon period's worn off, to the points, Nicola and Joe, that you were making, actually, you know, you need that colleague interaction. You need that hub where you can come together. I think we will start to ask more questions about what do we use an office space for. I don't think it will become somewhere where we mindlessly go all day, every day, because that's just what we've always done. I think we'll be like, what's the purpose of going into the office? Actually, if we've got a collaboration piece of work to do, that makes sense. If we haven't, then why would you commute? Why would you go in? I think, therefore, the challenges for HR and for organisations are, how do you resolve, you know, sort of how do you keep your culture within that? How do you maintain those communication networks between people? And how do you actually, to the point we made earlier, how do you build on this opportunity and the great gains we've made, not go backwards in the process of going forwards? And I think that's probably the biggest challenge of all that we're all going to face as we head into 2021 and beyond.
And Ursula, I'm going to put you on the spot. You've been listening to these three excellent thought leaders for the past half an hour. I'd love to hear what your prediction is for next year.
So I think for me, it does all come back to trust, to echo Joe's thoughts. And I've been sort of furiously scribbling, because it's really interesting. I work with a lot of diverse organisations and they're all having these conversations. So it really is interesting to kind of hear it all come together, you know, from all these different perspectives. But it all comes down to trust, because that, you know, we can enable different ways of working if we have that fundamental relationship. And that you know, really, I think it was Stephen Covey that said, you know, trust is the glue that holds all relationships together. That's never been more true than now. And the organisations who had placed such a strong focus on trust for COVID, in that world that, you know, we vaguely remember but can't really sort of imagine now, they were so much better positioned. And I think as we move into this new period of uncertainty, where we're not sure about whether we will re-enter periods of lockdown, as we kind of navigate ourselves through the longer term impact of this pandemic, the organisations that are, you know, well placed from a trust perspective can have those open conversations about what that shift blend that Kathryn was talking about, and that challenge, what that looks like, how we communicate. They can feel safe enough to be able to raise those issues, and have that kind of conversation about, you know, and about, you know, the reality of what it means to work at home all the time. If they are, you know, I've been working with global organisations and smaller organisations throughout this period. Universally, overwork and guilt have been two of the really, really huge issues that, you know, if you have that foundation built on trust, people feel safe enough to talk about. And I think when you get those out in the open, that's how we're going to be able to move forward with a healthy, sustainable balance of whatever that future of work looks like, and that sense of healthy integration. So yeah, for me, it is all about the trust, because that then leads to the other things that we've talked about.
Absolutely. And I think what's so interesting about that, and I totally agree about trust, about measuring the accountability and about this hybrid model, is, as Kathryn was saying before, you know, not everyone is suited to, you know, to people leadership. And, you know, as we're changing what it means to be a people manager and an organization at a kind of political level worldwide, we're seeing different kind of leaders step up, and it's, you know, it's showing value of having diversity of different, you know, leadership styles, and really makes me feel optimistic about, you know, how we can kind of shake up what it means to be a leader, what it means to be an HR leader. So thank you so much, all of you, to Kathryn, Nicola and Joe, and also Ursula, for being here and discussing the future of HR. And thank you for joining this as part of Flexpo Business.